possibilities. After Fidel, and I would preface it by saying not much is going to happen until after Fidel is still a giant on the scene in Cuba, and even his brother Raul Castro is not tempted to take very significant steps with that legacy looming. What I foresee, and this is a synthesis of a lot of people that are smarter than me, the revolutionary heroes of the 50s are trying to preserve their legacy, but the younger generations are listening to a different set of music, and they know what the alternatives are in the world. They can get television from Miami. They have relatives in New Jersey. They're aware that they are on the sidelines and they want to become players. So in reality, what happens? I believe the next generation comes along. They're fellows in their 60s and 50s and women who are skilled in diplomacy and bureaucracy, and they've been educated in Moscow or England or Germany, and they've been posted to New York and Washington and Tokyo. They're hip, they're street smart, they're wise people, they're good negotiators. I've sat across the table from them. And I think a new generation with less interest in political systems and more interest in improving their standards of living is likely to emerge.
I thought there was an embargo, but John, why don't you explain?
Well, as Michael suggests, this is a snapshot of some of the contradictions and confusion that I find so appealing about Cuba, but it's very contradictory. A couple of thoughts about the embargo. First of all, as you may know, it's illegal under the United Nations international law. We haven't, as a government of the United States, applied that to ourselves. Every year there's a vote in the United Nations. Last November, the vote was 186 opposing our embargo, 3 in favor. And rather than take your time to try to answer a question I'll pose because we would run out of time, the 3 supporters of the embargo, of course, are the United States. Surprisingly, the second one is Israel, which itself has been a victim of an embargo. The third one will cause your jaw to drop. It's the powerhouse Asian nation of Palau. However, the early 90s was the same time when there was terrific unhappiness, dissent, and deprivation in Cuba in general and in Havana in particular. And I am mindful that in 1959 it was only a small number of very unhappy but energetic people who overthrew the government of then dictator Batista. And I think in 1990, it's possible the Cuban government was conscious of the same thing and not enthusiastic to have huge numbers of foreign tourists coming into a place with some disgruntled citizens and stirring up activity. As a result, they very cleverly built beautiful beachfront resorts, 10 or a dozen of them, scattered around the island of Cuba. And each one is adjoined by an international airport. So you can get a direct flight from London or Paris or Rome directly to one of these beautiful resorts, unpack your bags, go lay on the beach for a week. All of that probably costs you $1,000, and go home. And the city of Havana would only be something you noticed in a guidebook. The tourism destinations have been scattered and not concentrated, and I think there's reasons that are worth discussion as to how that came about. American tourism to Cuba remains prohibited. Clearly, this will be an early item to be negotiated when the two governments elevate the level of their dialogue. But at the present time, you cannot go legally to Cuba to engage in tourism, and you can go only as part of an affinity group with an existing license from the U.S. Treasury Department. I believe that will change within the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. Cubans are very excited. They expect up to 3 million Americans will want to touch Cuban soil the first year after the embargo is ended. the renewal of discussions about immigration of Cubans to the U.S. Those were suspended during the Bush years. We currently lack a postal treaty, cannot mail a letter. We've got millions of Cuban Americans from divided families. They can't mail a letter to each other. An aviation treaty. It's extremely complicated to have an airplane flight from Miami to Cuba, and they operate daily, but you can't get your 90 frequent flyer miles because they're forced to be called charters, not scheduled. Aviation is a basket case that should be addressed. Drug interdiction. Anyway, there's 4 or 5 issues like this which Richardson began to discuss, and the outcomes would be to our mutual benefit. Fidel installed universal free education and some other things that go along with that. Healthcare, housing. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you can go to university, but you don't have any electricity or a place to sleep at night. So they developed a social safety net, which has expanded today to the point where, as I mentioned, they're very highly educated, talented, energetic, and English-speaking for the most part. So the question which I pose to you as an answer is why in 5 or 10 years would a major American company go offshore to India to find highly educated English-speaking people when we've got millions of them 90 miles away from Key West? So I think the future is very bright. I don't think that Nike's going to go down there to make shoes, but I think Dell could put a call center in to deal with computer repairs. And I think there are industries such as pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, which are very advanced, will be fertile ground for American companies who, even if we quadruple their rate of pay, they go from $1 a day to $4 a day. Well, my God. So I think there's enormous opportunities which would be to our mutual benefit. And I'm not suggesting we need to take advantage of these impoverished people, but a rising tide lifts all boats, in the words of John Kennedy. And I think we will find that those things that the Cubans can do well will benefit not only the Cuban people, but also the American people in terms of close access to high quality, inexpensive goods and services. Well, my friend was a schoolmate of Fidel's back in the 40s and 50s, and he was wringing his hands. He didn't know what to give to his friend for his 80th birthday, which was several years ago. And it dawned on him that in their young days, Fidel used to be enamored with watching the American movies. And he said, why don't you bring to me a DVD of a couple of his favorite films? And I said, okay, I'll try. He said the first one, his favorite was Picnic, starring Kim Novak. So I went home. Next trip, I brought it back. I passed it along. Trip after that, I was advised it was happily received. And by the way, could you bring another one? So, reading a lot of these spy thrillers, I figured, well, they've got me on a slippery slope here. First it's going to be DVDs, and then it'll be all our missile secrets, of course, about which I know nothing. So I said, okay, what would you like next? He said, well, The Creature from the Black Lagoon and Rebel Without a Cause. And if you can, The Day the Earth Stood Still. The original version. Okay, so I went back, I came back, I brought those. He liked them. I can picture Fidel and Raul sitting around, munching popcorn, watching these 50s era videos. And there were subsequent lists, and I still to this day have more requests. But it just amused me that I was not recruited as a spy, just a gun runner for 50-year-old videos for a failing dictator.